Welcome back. Joe Strupp is on the line with us, veteran journalist, former editor and publisher at Media Matters for America, author of the new book, Killing Journalism, How Greed, Laziness, and Donald Trump Are Destroying News and How We Can Save It. His website is joestrupp, strupp.com, and you can tweet him at Joe Strupp. Hey, Joe, welcome to the program.
Thanks. Good to be here.
As I'm sure you can imagine, I have some strong opinions on this topic, having worked in radio news since literally since the 1970s. In fact, since the late 1960s. I'm curious, how are greed, laziness, and Donald Trump destroying news? And then we'll get to how we can save it once we've diagnosed the problem.
Well, one of the things I wanted to do, I've been covering media for about 18 years, first at Editor and Publisher magazine, which covered the newspaper biz, and then at Media Matters for America. And one of the things I found over the years was, before we even met Donald Trump, at least as president or candidate, that news media was having problems with cutbacks, with people going after the easy story, not doing the in-depth story. The advertising problems led to many of the cutbacks, and then corporate takeovers demanded more profits. So the product itself was getting diminished. And I also wanted to counter the claims by a lot of people that it's liberal, left-wing fake news, that's the problem. All reporters are lefties and we're slanting news our way, which I don't find to be the truth. Obviously, there are people who want to slant news right or left, but I think that's a very minimal part, as you would probably know, too. Most reporters want to dig out stories, get the truth, bring down the corrupt politicians of either side. But they're less likely to do that because there are fewer reporters. There are more demands by online 24-hour news, and there's less money to pay them. There's less money to hire them. And little things like less money to do freedom of information requests, to get legal defense, to really dig out the story. And then we bring in the Internet, which made demands even more great and splintered the audience. And that sort of started even a panic among news outlets. We've got to grab eyes, we've got to grab readers, we've got to grab viewers with the quick, easy, sensational issue, and the more important, sometimes mundane, but even more valuable things are not covered. Then, of course, you bring Donald Trump in, who started the attacks on fake news, and he's really only increased them as president. I think some people thought, well, once he got in, things will calm down. I certainly didn't, because I knew, as you probably knew, of his deceit and misrepresentation and anti-press fervor early on, and it's only gotten worse. But it's really a combination of things. It's not just him, but he's definitely the most notable and the most recent to go along with a lot of the just general practices of news that have gotten worse and worse, because I think that's where the laziness comes in. Breaking news story hits, you're covering that forever, hours and hours, days and days, while other things aren't getting covered. Along with the cutbacks just in staff and resources, and the sort of growing mistrust of news, some of which you can blame on Trump, but some of it you can just blame on the way a lot of news is getting handled. So
I get that dynamic, and it seems to me that the simplest way that you can bias the news, if you're the filter, if you're the radio or television station or the website or the newspaper or whatever, is simply by picking and choosing among true stories, right?
Right.
So if I wanted to bias my, if I did my own newscast on this show, well, and to a certain extent, this is what you're going to hear from, this is a progressive opinion show. So the things that tend to reflect, that are true stories, that reflect poorly on Republicans or reflect well on Democrats, are more likely to be heard here than they are on right-wing talk radio, where it would be the exact opposite. But the thing that baffles me is that, MSNBC, to the best of my knowledge, has not been called out in a factual error or a lie at all in 2018. CNN did one. And I forget what it was, but Trump tweeted about it for weeks.
Of course.
Maybe you can remember what it was, but they got one thing wrong about one guy, and they apologized and they issued corrections, and still Trump tweeted about it for weeks. Fox News, you worked at Media Matters. Fox News literally lies every day and has since its inception. It's intrinsic to their DNA, and you'll find the same thing with right-wing hate radio. If you listen to it, you will find that much of what they're talking about is actually grounded on outright deception or such bad distortion of reality that it's functionally deception. Why is that?
Because it started from the beginning. The group that I trace a lot of the current conservative media back to the Nixon era, when Nixon was in trouble and there was a lot of conservatives coming around to support him. And you can trace it back to the National Review, actually, which started in the 50s, but they were never really big on total.
Well, I used to read the National Review. My dad was a big William Buckley fan. I don't think they lied.
Very fair-minded, respected publication.
Yeah.
But I think after the Nixon-Watergate debacle and resignation, there seemed to be this backlash that followed through Gerald Ford, followed through Jimmy Carter. When Reagan came in, and I do several chapters in the book on this. When Reagan came in, he got a lot of support from the conservative right, and then talk radio exploded, and Rush Limbaugh was one of the first. But that started this idea that if you are putting out an ideology, whether it's fact-based or not, that's okay. You're trying to get listeners, you're trying to get an audience, you're trying to push a political ideology. And the right was much better, as you know, at pushing that on talk radio and on certain outlets than the liberal side. Your show and many others break through because they're so well done, I believe, and there is an audience for it. But the right wing picked up that talk radio void years ago and really ran with it, and the facts were not the most important thing. And there were many people who were taught for years that the media is liberal, that the mainstream outlets are liberal, so let me listen to this right-wing view, whether they're being honest or not. That carried into Clinton, to Obama, and then, of course, to Trump. But you're right. We did much of our research at Media Matters looking just at what is factual and what isn't.
Right.
And by the Fox News or many of the right-wing outlets would just be dishonest, would just be misinterpreting facts and basically lying. And when they're called on it, they don't really seem to mind. And a lot of their listeners and viewers don't seem to mind. One of the phrases we always had was, you're entitled to your own opinion, you're not entitled to your own facts. And I'm no loudmouth speaker for the left or the right. I'm a reporter who loves journalism, who has a great deal of respect for the media, and I want it to be honest and fair-minded because I think that plays into people's mistrust a lot more than anything Donald Trump says or any real mistakes. Because you're right, many will make mistakes on the right and the left, but it seems like the left and mainstream are bigger at correcting them and admitting them. And studies have shown if you correct mistakes, if you admit mistakes, the Houston Chronicle in recent weeks had a big scandal where one of their reporters was making up sources. They dealt with it very openly. He was fired. They had a big internal investigation, a big report in the story and on their website, and it very much diffused the situation. So the people said, okay, here was a mistake. Here's how it happened. It was one person. It was one time, and they cleaned it up. You know, on the right? No, you don't.
Yeah, we had talk radio in the United States before Limbaugh, though. The most famous talker in the country and the largest talker in the country was Alan Berg. He was broadcasting out of Denver. He was on a Clear Channel station, a 50,000-watt station that was blowing a signal from Alaska down to Mexico, and had listeners in, I think it was 27 states. And he was basically doing the same, not the same, but something similar to what I'm doing, more or less progressive, perspective. And he was, to the best of my knowledge, always accurate. But he was gunned down by two skinheads in the parking lot of the radio station in, as I recall, either the late 70s or early 80s. And then there was this gap for a few years where there was no, really big national profile. And then Limbaugh comes in with millions of dollars of funding, debuting on 50 major stations across the country, major money behind him. And now, even to this day, as what's his name? Ken Vogel pointed out over in Politico about 3 years ago, Limbaugh and Hannity are still getting literally $1 million, $2 million a year subsidies from the Heritage Foundation. I mean, nothing like that even exists on the left. So, A, your thoughts on that, and B, I want to get to the solutions because we've only got 2 minutes until we're going to hit a hard break here.
Yes, well, one of the reasons that occurred is also that there was a change in AM and FM radio, as you know better than I, that there was a lot of loss of music on AM. The FM was coming in the 70s and taking the music away from AM. That opened up a lot of AM stations to some kind of alternative, and the talk took over along with the same time that the Reagan and conservative movement took over, and they were just kind of pushed together. That was a real timing thing. But you're right. Somewhere along the line, the lack of honesty and accuracy was accepted, and accepted very much on many on the right, and that's because, believe it or not, they felt like they couldn't prove the left-wing bias the way they wanted to, so they felt like, okay, we're going to say that the left is biased and slanting. That makes it okay for us.
It's the doctrine of the noble lie.
if you call yourself conservative, you're giving away your bias right away.
Yeah, it's the doctrine of the noble lie. It's you know, it has a long history. So in the minute and a half we have left, Joe Strupp, author of Killing Journalism. How do we save journalism?
Well, one of the things I look at in the book, and I don't want to end it on a down note because I don't believe it's all a downer, nonprofit sites are a big push now. There's at least 180 of them around the country. The big one well-known in New York is ProPublica.
Yeah.
There's the Center for Investigative Reporting in California, the New England Investigative Reporting in New England. There's the Marshall Project out of New York, which deals with criminal activity and crime stories. And there is a push for a lot of nonprofit entities and foundations who are trying to push for more local news. That's another area that gets struck. Very little local reporting, very little state reporting. I get into that in the book as well. And a lot of less legal protection for reporters because there's less money to defend them and to seek things like credentials and access to public information. But I think that's one of the things we look at is nonprofit. I always thought many news outlets should be nonprofit anyway because they are public entities. That's not going to happen maybe as widespread as I would like. But these foundations
prior to '87, when Reagan nuked the Fairness Doctrine, all news was nonprofit. I mean, I worked at a radio station in Lansing, Michigan, from '68 until '76 or whatever the year was, and you know, we had 5 guys in the newsroom. They lost money on that news operation because that was the cost of having a license.
That is one of the things now. There's less demand by the FCC to do something that's considered a public service, and there's more corporations and conglomerates taking over, leveraging their money, and demanding higher profits, 20, 30%, from places that used to get away with 8, 10% profit because they were locally owned, family owned, or were considered public entities that wanted to serve. And the news divisions were not supposed to make money for many years. And then you saw in the late 70s and early 80s, there was more demand for that. So they had to trim costs, increase profit, and that cut a lot of the product down to what it is today.
Yeah, there you go. Joe Strupp, a veteran journalist, editor, publisher, Media Matters America, author of the new book, Killing Journalism, How Greed, Laziness, and Donald Trump Are Destroying News, and How We Can Save It. Good stuff. JoeStrupp.com. Joe, thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir.
Great talking with you. We'll be right back.